can you build a civilization that stands the test of time? That's what Sid Meier's Civilization asks of players when you first boot it up. It's a message that first appeared a long time ago, in the murky bygone age of the mid to late 90s. Back then, one of the most popular kinds of games was a genre called 4X, and those 4 X's stood for Explore, Expand, Exterminate, and Exploit. These games saw you controlling one empire or species of many in a large world, competing with other players to make the biggest cities, the nastiest armies, and the cleverest boffins. The problem was, you could play 100 different imitators of Master of Orion or Alpha Centauri back in the day, and you'd find the same patterns cropping up. There was the faction that was good at war, one that had a powerful industry, and one that made lots of food. Your choice of faction is the catalyst for all the other choices you make over the course of a strategy campaign, and probably the most important one at that. It defines not just your strategy as a whole, but also an aesthetic inspiration for your decision making. And if the factions are all the same or near enough across games, then you'll likely be making only cosmetically different decisions no matter which game you play. Sid Meier himself says that good games are a series of interesting decisions. The validity of this quote when it comes to video games as a whole is oft debated, but we can still apply it to his own games. Is choosing to go to war because your faction is slightly better at war than everyone else an interesting choice? No, probably not. Eventually, people just kinda got sick of this sort of thing. When every 4X offered the same experience with a different license or setting, without much different going on under the hood, things evaporated, and the 4X genre all but collapsed. For better or for worse, Civilization, one of the oldest 4X franchises, is one of the only ones left. Civ managed to ride out the 4X extinction by having relatively tight balance, high production values, and an iconic theme. But now that it's the biggest and oldest game on the block, there's been no impetus for it to change, and as such, it carries with it many of the same issues that plagued 4X back in the day. In recent years, however, the 4X in one form or another is seeing a slow but steady rebirth, and I'd argue that this comes from developers learning to distance themselves from Civilization. For example's sake, I'll be taking a look at how these new games handle factions, specifically how they tackle the long-term and political decision-making upon which the genre is built, but also how they prevent each gameplay experience from being the same every time. See, in older style 4X, Civ included, the problem was that not only were these factions often superficially and strategically similar between games, the design philosophy of simply having some of the factions be better or worse in certain areas led them to being little more than modifiers on the same gameplay experience. Sure, I can research technologies a bit faster and get more faith as Arabia in Civilization 6, but I'm still playing essentially the same game as whoever's playing Rome. Our strengths may be different, but our priorities are the same, and our interactions with other players usually aren't going to depend on what faction they're playing, just if they're stronger or weaker than us, or if they have things we want. It's serviceable, but I can't help but thinking it's all a bit bland. The first of the games I want to look at is Endless Legend by Amplitude Studios. It takes place on the planet of Origa, where a variety of different races battle it out for ultimate dominance of the planet. It's your standard 4X fare. But what makes the Endless series stand out is Amplitude's approach to designing these factions, by giving each a unique mechanical identity. For example, these guys are the Necrophage. Nasty, right? They're a race of horrible bug monsters that exist to eat just about everything. Let's take a look at their abilities. Okay, cheap swarm units, poison, faster health regeneration, pretty standard stuff so far. But then, take a look at this, -1 food on all terrain. This is a pretty horrible downside to playing the Necrophage. Versus any other faction, you'll nearly always be outpaced economically, scientifically, and industrially because you simply won't have enough food to grow population to do them all. But then, we can see these. Gain extra food from killing things, extra attack power for every player you're at war with, and bonus food from pacified minor factions. The Necrophage are explicitly encouraged to go to war in order to keep up, and given the appropriate bonuses. Here, I'll explain. You need food, which means you've got to go and eat your enemies. You go to war, picking up that nice little bonus and destroy your enemies, giving you new cities and food stockpiles used to grow your empire. Bigger cities means more need for food you can't produce normally, so you go to war again in order to feed the hive, and so the cycle continues. By changing the way the Necrophage handle war, making it not about opportunism and crushing those weaker than you, but instead as a means for survival, Endless Legend drastically alters how the game is played. These changes also make the Necrophage satisfying to play against, as their unique playstyle leads to interesting diplomatic scenarios, where once rivals must band together to stop the Necrophage war machine in its tracks before it becomes unstoppable. There's a few more nice flavour additions, such as being unable to utilise most diplomacy and the ability to sacrifice population in your sprawling hive cities for a temporary approval boost, offsetting the damage done by having a huge populous empire. As a comparison, let's take a look at a warmonger faction in Civilization 6, the Norwegians. Oh, okay, slightly faster boats, all naval units can do coastal raids, which would be interesting if it were unique to the Norwegians. A unit which is stronger attacking than it is defending, cliché, but okay, and a church that likes forests. Okay, you see, it's not quite as interesting or as impactful as Endless Legends Necrophages. As the Norwegians, you're encouraged to go to war because you're slightly better than everyone else at naval combat, but there's really not that much to make the warfare experience unique, besides the fact that some of your units look different and some are a bit stronger. Amplitude spices this up not only by having much more variance between a smaller number of factions, but also by giving factions inherent weaknesses. The Necrophage go to war to survive because they can't feed themselves. The Broken Lords do it to secure new sources of delicious money because they have to buy population. And the roving clans can't actually declare war at all, but they can move whole cities in order to get away from the front lines and protect their investment. In all of Amplitude's 4X games, they've started with 8 factions, and this isn't a coincidence. There are 8 major parts of the game you'll be engaging with in Endless Legend. We'll call them modes of operation, and each faction overhauls one of them. By the way, check out this video for a brief explanation on what modes of operation are. We've got making units and buildings, getting and spending dust, that's money, researching new techs, growing new citizens for your empire, diplomacy, military offense, military defense, and finally, settling cities and exploring. Notice how each faction is matched up to a different part of the game. We can see the Necrophage are all about conquest, and their mechanical changes reflect that. Let's take a look at the Cultists of the Eternal End, who are all about city building, or a lack thereof. You see, the Cultists are themed around settling and exploration, which means that Amplitude have fundamentally changed how that mode of operation works. In the Cultists' case, they can only make one city, but it quickly becomes a gigantic metropolis. Just like the Necrophages, this too drastically changes the way you play the game. Instead of competing for resources and territory with everyone else, you do your best to keep to yourself, shying away from world politics and slowly building up your megacity to unleash an unstoppable endgame. In the same vein, each expansion adds a new mode of operation, and thusly a new faction to match, such as the Forgotten, who match the new spying mechanics. The Forgotten can't research technologies, and must instead steal them from their enemies. This means they'll always be at a technological disadvantage and must make up for it with their suite of sabotage abilities. Amplitude's 4X games live and die based on the rich ecosystem and interplay between the factions they've created, but this system isn't perfect. Some modes of operation are hard to change, leaving the Wild Walkers and the Ardent Mages in particular feeling a bit boring in comparison to the other races. Whilst they've still got more going for them than any faction in most 4X, it's proof that Amplitude's strategy, while successful, isn't foolproof. So, let's look at the other end of the spectrum. Instead of having richly designed and asymmetric factions, why not instead give players the ability to make their own, like in Stellaris? Each game of Stellaris is preceded by you creating your species from a wide selection of traits, their natural biome, social structure, ethics, and so forth. Now, this isn't so different from the ability to cobble together custom factions out of traits that normally make up the default ones. Even the Endless games have this feature, but these custom factions have no real identity of their own, and more often than not, they aren't balanced around. Introducing the Squigglonians. They're a race of cute, sociopathic squid cats who hate everyone who isn't them and have an egalitarian ideology in service to a ruling class. Now, normally this is the kind of thing that gets written for you in a race's bio, and more often than not, it doesn't really affect gameplay decisions. In Stellaris, however, your choice of species traits affect a load of things, such as your available tech options, with spiritualist empires gaining access to psionics, and materialists gaining access to cybernetic augmentations, to name some of the most game-changing. Your ethos and species statistics also let you choose various options in the game's wide variety of events. Make friends with a subterranean alien society, enslave them, assimilate them into your own empire, or, if you like the Squigglonians, cleanse the planet of the filthy Xenos threat. What's more is that these racial modifiers aren't static. As your empire grows, various political parties will emerge with different ideologies from the ones you picked at the start of the game, and you can embrace them to change your empire's ethics. As my game went on, the Squigglonians forwent their egalitarianism and transitioned into a more militaristic outlook, as they scoured the stars of disgusting alien monstrosities. In Civilization, sure, you can pick your kind of government, but they're often woefully simplistic. Fascism and communism, arguably the ideologies that changed the face of the modern era, give you extra military production as well as strength, and let your industrial zones defend, plus a more general production boost respectively. A decision which would be a simple adjustment of numbers in Civ decides many of the options you'd have available to you in Stellaris. It also changes a lot of the background flavour text. Midway through writing this video, Paradox announced this feature: alternate voiceover depending on your ethos. Let's take a look.
Under no circumstances must the Xeno be trusted. It will lie, it will cheat, and it will do anything in its power to undermine the efforts of those who in truth are its superiors.
The strength of Stellaris' factions comes from not how mechanically different they are from each other, but from how the game connects every other decision you make to your faction's identity, from politics to warfare to immigration, and then lets you change it as the game progresses, just like how real empires grow and change and split over time. Stellaris' custom factions do present a balance and development issue for Paradox though. With so many different empires that players can create, it's hard to cater to each one in an effective manner. The aforementioned cyborg and psionic paths are much more fleshed out than, say, anything you can do with a hive-minded empire, for example. And of course, these ethics, policies and faction modifiers are only really effective at making unique gameplay decisions if a player is willing to roleplay, which many aren't. If you simply wanted to build the most effective empire of a given type, then there are a few clear choices that drastically limit the number of effective options you have. Industrious and intelligent in particular, which increase your science and mineral generation, are clear best options in most cases. So that brings us back to Civ, a game that's remained pretty much unchanged for decades, yet continues to sell fantastically. In many ways, the secret to Civ's success is this very lack of complexity I've criticised. It has the lowest barrier to entry of all modern day 4X, and lets people feel like they're controlling alternate historical nations, even if the things that distinguish those nations are little more than window dressing. And that's Civ's purpose really. An entry-level 4X for people who are new to strategy games, or for people who just want a less intensive experience, and it fills that role excellently. The problem is, gamers and developers alike seeing Civilization as the be-all and end-all of 4X, despite it being comparatively pared down to a lot of other games on the market. A problem I, too, am guilty of. Throughout this video, I've been comparing both games extensively to Civilization as a measure of their success, and in all cases, you've likely not questioned this. Really, this kind of mental bias is the core of the issue. Subconsciously or not, the Civilization model is synonymous with the 4X genre because of its past successes. Civilization and other genre-defining games shouldn't be something to aspire to, or something to arbitrarily distance yourself from, but rather it should be seen as a foundation to iterate upon and improve, like Endless Legend and Stellaris have, by changing how factions work, and, more importantly, standing strong as fantastic games in their own right. The opening crawl of Civilization asks players if they can build a civilization that can stand the test of time. No great empire has ever been formed by trying to replicate past glories, and the same is true for video games. Only by learning from what came before, but looking to the future, can you really make a game that stands the test of time.